Chapter 9. Back home once again. Gagara was the first to emerge from the edge of the forest. She flew from the tree line across the battlefield to the once great castle of the Demoth family. There, she hesitated for a moment or two, hovering over a part of the battlements that stood high above the main gates of the castle. Then she thrust her legs forward and grabbed the top of one of the crenellations with her talons, settling into a position from which she would easily be able to watch over her mail. Reyes and Ursa left the tree line virtually side by side. Reyes's eyes were everywhere, looking at every minor detail of the field. The place was still covered in corpses that no one had yet come to bury, and the looters were still hard at work, grabbing whatever they could from those that had fallen. Reyes wasn't sure if all the looters were affiliated with those that had tried to make him a slave, or if some of them were working for themselves, but Reyes didn't trust any of them. As they crossed the field, Reyes kept his hand tight on the hilt of the sword that he had taken from one of the slavers. Not that he really had a lot of choice. He hadn't had the time to grab the scabbard from the dead elf's body, and when he had tried to tuck the sword into the waistband of his skirt, it had not only felt uncomfortable, but it had also made retrieving the blade with any sort of alacrity quite hazardous. The short walk from the tree line to the castle wasn't totally without incident. As Reyes and Ursa were getting close to the main gates of the castle, they had to jump out of the way suddenly to avoid being trampled. There were 6 elves mounted on horses that looked far too big for them. They were riding at great speed as if time was of the essence. Reyes had been too busy diving out of the way to notice much else about them, but he did see that they all bore the Yagnokan loyalty tattoos, and only those tattoos, telling him that they were all members of the Yagnok clan. Reyes turned his head to follow the passage of the 6 goblins. They followed the road to the south towards the trees from which he and Ursa had just emerged. Since that road led through to the village of Demoth, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen when those 6 goblins rode into the camp of the slavers. "I wonder where they're going," Ursa commented, disdain in his voice. "I don't know," Reyes replied. He climbed back to his feet, more concerned with what the goblins had wanted at the castle. That road would take them virtually anywhere in the country. "Anywhere?" Ursa asked. "Well, nearly anywhere," Reyes told him. He watched the goblins for a moment longer. The horses made good time across the field of the dead. Then something seemed to occur to him. He looked up at the wall and called to his girlfriend. "Gagara!" It took only a moment for the distinctive flutter of wings that Reyes recognised as the sound of Gagara taken to the air, until the moment she landed beside them. "Yes, handsome," she answered. "We're going to need some horses. Can you get to the stables and grab 4 for us? The best 4 horses you can see. Don't worry about saddling them. Just have them at the base of the prison tower when Ursa and I emerge from my brother." "Okay," Gagara agreed. "Which one is the prison tower?" Reyes pointed at the rough direction of the tower in question. "It's that one." Gagara nodded, following his finger. Then she questioned, 4 horses?" "4 horses," Reyes repeated. Gagara seemed uncertain. "One for Ursa, and your brother, and I'm guessing that with your damaged wing you also plan to ride. But why the 4th? I'm quite happy keeping to the air, and I can make better time flying than any horse." Reyes nodded and grinned. "I'm hungry. I was thinking in terms of lunch. I'll admit it would be a shame to waste such a beautiful creature as one of my father's horses on food, but I don't want to risk anything the elves have been cooking." Gagara nodded. "Makes sense to me." Almost immediately she was back in the air. This time Gagara flew through the open gateway and into the castle courtyard. "What was that about?" Ursa asked. Reyes patted the Minotaur gently on the shoulder and began to lead the way onto the drawbridge that led into the castle. "I was just sending Gagara to fetch us some horses from the stables, so that we don't have to walk out of here." The Minotaur grinned broadly, and then he began a gentle rumbling laugh. "Did I say something funny?" Reyes asked. "You're an intelligent creature, Tanny," Ursa commented, "but you can really be dim sometimes." Reyes said as he looked round at his friend. "How so?" "The humans burn their crops in the fields. They burn down their homes and take away anything the elves can possibly use. And you think they're going to leave horses in the stables for anyone to take?" Reyes nodded his head slowly. "I see your point." A lot had changed in the courtyard since Reyes was last here. The place was still crawling with elves, but most of them seemed to have passed out. There were empty bottles and smashed crates everywhere. It looked as if they had drained his father's wine cellar dry. Reyes also felt a moment's regret at all the furniture that was lying about the courtyard, broken and scattered. He knew some of those things, and it was heartbreaking to see them like this. There were still a few elves scattered about the place that were both awake and still partying. One of these had a bow ready with an arrow, and he was waving it dangerously in front of a group of friends of his. They were laughing at his antics, apparently unaware of their potential danger. As well as the elves still partying, there were a number of burial details still hard at work trying to dispose of the bodies that had fallen in the courtyard. Other elves had been given guard duty on the walls of the castle. "I could retake this castle with about a dozen men right now," Reyes commented bitterly. "Yes," Orsa agreed, "but you couldn't keep her. This castle is now on the supply route from Elistrade. There'll be an almost constant flow of supply wagons passing through this area to feed and equip the army as it progresses south. Reserve troops will also follow this route into the human kingdom. Forget any thoughts of retaking the castle. You wouldn't be able to hold her for long." "It wasn't a serious thought," Reyes explained. "I was just speculating at the state of the troops." "Oh," was all Orsa would comment. Reyes glanced quickly over at the prison tower. There was no sign of anyone on guard duty at the bottom of the tower. Instead, the wooden door that led into the interior had a slight bluish tinge to it. Reyes couldn't begin to guess at what sort of spell was being used. It could be nothing more than a simple alarm, or it could be a trap with fatal consequences. Presumably, anyone that needed access to that tower would have some way of getting through the door unscathed. It was reasonable to assume that Alderman Bartonet would have such a device. Reyes needed to talk to the Alderman. The last time Reyes had seen the Alderman, he had been standing just outside the main residency. It made sense that that would be where the Alderman would have made his headquarters, setting himself up like the Duke of the land, taking over the rooms and even the home of Reyes' father. Reyes assumed he would find the Alderman in the Great Hall, surrounded by his highest-ranking officers. "This way," Reyes told the Minotaur. He then proceeded to step round the sleeping elves and headed towards the main residency of the castle. A change of ownership would often bring many other changes. There were no guards on duty at the main doors, neither outside nor inside. Upon stepping into the hall of the residency, the whole place looked as if it had been gutted. The two statues that used to stand at the bottom of the stairs were gone. Where once had stood two giant pot plants, each providing a wide variety of colour just inside the doors, there was now nothing. Reyes also remembered that there had been a suit of armour on display in the corridor across from the Great Hall. Admittedly, it wasn't actually in the hall itself, but it could be seen from the bottom of the stairs. It, too, was now gone. At one time, these walls had been covered in paintings of past kings and past dukes. They were also gone, leaving only the memories of their existence in the discoloration of the walls where they had once been. Even the carpet that had covered the stairs had been torn up and removed, leaving only the bare wooden runners underneath, and a few scraps where the carpet had adhered to the nails. Anything that had made this place feel like home to the Demoff family had been taken out and thrown away, and it still wasn't lunchtime. There were voices coming from the direction of the Great Hall. Even through the thick wooden doors that separated the entryway from the Great Hall, Reyes' superior hearing had no trouble making out what was being said. "Why do you even put up with that Minotaur?" Reyes couldn't be certain, but he thought the voice sounded suspiciously like that of Dragonman Finerte. "I hate to see the way he lords it over his subordinate." His subordinate came an echo that reinforced Reyes' view as to who the original speaker was. The reply, most likely Alderman Bartonet, seemed almost dismissive in his tone. It might even be said that there was a patronising feel to the way he answered. "You need to understand the usefulness of the other races. If there is no point in antagonising your subordinates, then don't. You get more flies with honey than with brine. What is it your holy book says on the subject? Never miss the opportunity to take advantage of the lesser races." "Not exactly," came the reply, "but that is the gist of it." Reyes approached the large double doors of the Great Hall, unsure what to do. Should he knock and enter? Knock and wait to be invited in? Or should he just enter and forget any semblance of ceremony? Alderman Bartonet was waiting for him to return, and the hour must almost certainly be up by now. It wasn't a hard decision to make. With all the talking going on behind the door, there was a good chance that a knock wouldn't even be heard. It really only left him with one option. Just as Reyes had settled on the idea of barging the door open, he heard some footsteps descending the stairs behind him. They weren't the iron-shod footsteps of an elven soldier, but rather the soft padding of someone who was barefoot. Yet it was a heavier tread than that of a harpy. Reyes turned his head quickly to see who it was. It was Gress, the Minotaur Dragonman of Rave's Raiders. He was on his own, his elf assistant being nowhere in sight, and Gress seemed almost as surprised to see Reyes as Reyes was to see him. "Tanrag! Good to see you," Gress commented in a loud and friendly voice that was clearly intended to break the ice as much as it was to convey a greeting. "Sir," Reyes replied, trying to echo the intent in Gress's voice. "Good to see you," Gress repeated. He descended to the bottom of the stairs and came around the corner, approaching Reyes. His hands were open, palms towards Reyes as if trying to welcome the harpy into the fold. His eyes flickered momentarily towards the sword Race was still carrying in his hand, and then he asked, "Did you give any more thought to my offer?" Race smiled to himself. He really hadn't given the matter much thought. After all, by the end of the day he was hoping to have put his role in the invasion of the country well behind him. There were other considerations that needed to be made, though. If he was going to merge into the occupied parts of the country, then the black skirt of Reyes raiders was far more likely to be taken seriously by the occupying forces than that of the brown skirt of the Hope, even if it did mean a drop in rank. Then he looked in the eyes of Gress and said, "I think I will take the offer." "Oh, that's excellent," Gress replied, a broad smile spreading across his face. He glanced quickly at Orsa and gave him a perfunctory bow. Then he seemed to ignore the other Minotaur completely as he spoke to Race. "We're going to stay here until after lunch. I don't know about you, but I'm quite hungry. Then in the afternoon we'll start by making our way back to the Raiders' barracks in Golspon. Once there, you'll be able to learn our ways, and maybe get a little bit of training in various combat methods. I've seen you. You're good with a blade, but there's always someone better. And we at the Raiders have some of the best trainers that you'll find anywhere. You will start at the rank of..." Race held up a hand in an effort to stop the Minotaur. It didn't work. "Chargeman," the Minotaur continued. "But our commanding officer is right there, so getting your promotion to Wormman should be nothing more than a formality. You will find..." Race tried again to signal that he had heard enough, but Gress wouldn't be stopped. "That much like the Hope, the various races in Reyes Raiders get on much better together than they maybe would otherwise. I think it's the fact that each soldier has to depend on each other soldier, regardless of what race or sex they happen to be. Yes, we have women too, and..." Race tried once more, and finally, this time, Gress seemed to get the message. "What is it?" Race looked up at the Minotaur. How could he explain that he didn't have the time for all this mucking about, that by the time he'd finished his training, he would be too late to save his brother, or that the war would be over and it would be too late for him to make any real difference? He sighed. "I can't go with you to Golspon." "You can't?" the Minotaur asked. Race shook his head. "I have business in Florif, and I can't just get up and return to Golspon and leave everything undone." "You're a member of the Raiders now," Gress told him, as if that was the fact that was important. "Your business, whatever it is, no longer has any bearing. You are Chargeman Tanrag, member of Reyes Raiders. I have already accepted your membership. You are now under my direct command. We are going to Golspon." "I can't," Race told the Minotaur. "There was one excuse he could use. Alderman Bartonet wants me to question one of his prisoners. I cannot refuse him. And chances are he's going to want me to hang around after that, because I speak the local language." Then, before Gress could reply, Race pushed open the large door of the Great Hall and entered. Alderman Bartonet was sat in the chair of Race's father. It was much as Race had imagined. The elven commander seemed to have made himself quite at home, his subordinates scattered around the room in small groups. Many were low-ranking officers, carrying the rank of Drankman and even Chargeman. Standing much closer to the Alderman was a small grouping of the higher Echelon officers. There were 3 bearing the rank of Dragonman, including Finerte. There were also 3 others bearing the rank of Wormman, including Frayne. And there was an Inquisitor standing just behind the Alderman in the almost featureless red robes of his position. He too bore the rank of Alderman, although he was clearly subordinate to Bartonet. Gress didn't stay there, virtually standing in the doorway of the Great Hall, looking as if he was nothing more than Race's subordinate. Once they had passed through the doors into the hall, Gress patted Race in a friendly manner on the shoulder. He muttered, "We'll talk later," into Race's ear, and then he headed into another part of the Great Hall, leaving Race and Orsa on their own. "Who?" The Alderman stood up suddenly from his seat and peered angrily at Race as he walked through the doors with the 2 Minotaurs flanking him. The Alderman's eyes flickered momentarily to the sword that Race was carrying. "You dare come before your leader with a sword in hand?" Race shivered at the voice. "Forgive me, my lord, I have no other way to carry it. I will dispose of it at once." "Tanrag!" The Alderman seemed to finally recognise who had entered the Great Hall. The fact that the Alderman recognised him at all probably owed more to the Drakeman insignia on Race's skirt than anything else. "It's good to see you. You may keep the sword. I've seen you wield a blade, and it would be good to know that someone with your skill is close by, watching over me. Get yourself a scabbard, though, would you? Holding the sword the way you are does make me feel a little nervous." "I will, my lord," Race agreed. "And please, stop calling me your lord. I am your commanding officer. The correct phrase is sir," the Alderman insisted. "Sir," Race repeated. "Good." The Alderman looked around. "Can someone please hand this harpy a scabbard before he hurts someone with that thing?" He turned his attention back to Race. "I did tell you I wanted to see you back in an hour. Did you find your girlfriend at least?" "I did, sir," Race replied. And she was alive? The Alderman asked. She was, sir, Race responded. One of the officers in the room, an elf bearer in the rank of Drakeman, approached Race cautiously and passed him a scabbard that was suitable to house his sword. Race secured the blade in the sheath, almost instantly noticing that there was a marked lessening of tension in the room as soon as he put the blade away. There was still no belt for him to hang the scabbard from, though, so Race still had to carry it in his hand. Well, good for you. The Alderman didn't miss a beat. What am I going to do about this hour? I did make myself clear. I should punish you, but I still need you to question the prisoner. I am deeply sorry, sir, Race replied. I did all I could to get here within the time you said. It was a great challenge to get back here at all. Race took a step closer to the Alderman. While I was outside the walls of the castle checking the dead for any sign of my girlfriend, I was attacked and captured by slavers. Slavers? The Alderman looked incredulous. He took a step back and half turned as he did so, looking to the Inquisitor standing behind the throne. There was little more than a nod that passed between the two aldermen, but it spoke volumes. Then Alderman Bartonet turned his attention back to Race, and as he did so, he returned Race's statement back to him as a question. You were captured by slavers? Race watched the Inquisitor for a moment. The elven mage made a selection of gestures in the air, while muttering something that, even to Race's excellent hearing, sounded a little more than a distant whisper. Race knew what the Inquisitor was doing, though, and he waited until the mage was finished before he reaffirmed his comment. It was always good to have it known that what you were saying was the truth. I was captured by slavers. He tells the truth, the Inquisitor commented almost silently, but this was loud enough for Race to hear. My lord, I mean, sir, Race volunteered, I wasn't the only one. The slaves seemed to think that the members of the Hope were their rightful property. They had taken the entire regiment into their custody with the aid of those who are, shall we say, easily malleable to elven suggestion. Those who have eaten elven food, the Alderman commented. Let's not be shy about it. The Alderman glanced round at the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor nodded. He tells the truth. Remember that messenger you had me send to the Emperor's man? Race asked. She was also a member of the Hope, and the slavers had intercepted her and put her in the cage with the rest of us. Truth, the Inquisitor declared. Is she free now? The Alderman asked, his face beginning to turn red with anger. She is free, Race declared. Good, the Alderman commented. But such a delay could cost us dearly. If the Emperor's man thinks I've been holding back information that might be vital to the war effort, it could mean my head on the block. The Alderman looked angrily round at the gathered officers behind him, and then he turned his attention back on Race. Tell me, when you escaped from the slavers, you didn't happen to leave them all dead and their camp in ruins, did you? I didn't, Race replied. Those of us who got out were lucky to do so. We didn't have either the opportunity or the weapons to fight back. Truth, the Inquisitor offered. The Alderman nodded his head slowly and walked up to Race. Then, without saying a word, he walked angrily back to the ducal chair. I have to do something about those slavers. I can't have people coming across the border and imprisoning my soldiers as if it's their right to do so. I'll send a punitive expedition to the slavers' camp. Then he turned and called, Tanrag? Yes, sir, Race replied. Could you lead my army back to the slavers' camp? Could you find your way back there? The Alderman asked. Nothing easier, sir, Race replied. Good, the Alderman asserted. He looked round at his gathered officers. I want the army ready to leave in 1 hour's time. We'll show them the folly of what it means to mess with the elven army. We shall show no mercy, and we shall execute every last one of them, stringing them up as a warning to others. Sir, began one of the other officers, a Dragonman Race didn't recognise. It was clear from the way he spoke that he was hesitant to say anything. Our soldiers have been busy celebrating since the castle fell to us, and none of them are in any condition to march anywhere. They are certainly in no condition to fight. The Alderman looked angrily at the speaker for a moment. His hand even seemed to rest lightly on the hilt of the blade that he bore at his midriff. Then he nodded and almost seemed to calm down a little. So the slavers must go unpunished for now. By the time my soldiers are ready to march, they will have moved on. He sighed and sat back down in the chair. Very well, let's get back to the business of the day. Sir, Race commented, he wondered if there might be a way to pay back the elf that had sold them to the slavers, if nothing else. Although the slavers might be able to get away with their crime, they thought they had the rights to the soldiers of the Hope. Someone sold us to them. What? The Alderman's face began to look very stormy again. Who? Do you know who? Give me a name. Pah, Dragonman Finerte commented. This is nonsense. Clearly he's just trying to hide his own failings. Failings, Frayne commented. The Alderman glanced round at the Inquisitor. The harpy has been telling us the truth, the Inquisitor replied in a clear, matter-of-fact tone. Who? The Alderman asked Race almost scarily. Who sold my soldiers into slavery? Dragonman Finerte, Reyes replied. He turned and looked accusingly at the Dragonman. Truth, the Inquisitor commented. No, Dragonman Finerte declared. It isn't true. He tried to back away from the Alderman as he did so. His shoulders were each grabbed by the officers that had been standing close beside him. One of these officers was Wormman Frayne. He's lying. He's guessing. How can you take the words of a harpy against that of an elf? The Book of Consequences, Canto 17, line 41. For the word of the beast is meaningless when placed against the word of an elf. He glanced hopefully at Wormman Frayne, but this time there was no echo. The word of the beast may be meaningless, the Alderman commented, but not the word of my Inquisitor. Take this piece of refuge out into the courtyard, tie him between two posts, and leave him to rot in the sun. If any of our soldiers wish it, and are awake enough to do so, they may use him as target practice. Wormman Frayne, and the other officer who had also impeded the Dragonman's escape, began to drag Finerte from the Great Hall. Finerte resisted, and screamed the whole way. His screams could still be heard once they had left the hall. Reyes couldn't resist watching as the once commanding officer of the Hope was dragged away. He couldn't help but smirk. Finerte had hated the soldiers under his command so much that the first chance he got he had sold them into slavery. And there was a kind of poetic justice to it all. The look on Ursa's face was less than content. If anything, there was a touch of irritation to the Minotaur's expression. So, the Alderman said, getting out of his chair again and approaching Reyes, now that that's sorted, we should go and visit the prisoner and see what he knows. Yes, sir, Reyes said in a tone that suggested agreement. The Alderman beckoned for the Inquisitor to follow. Then he looked back and glanced at Ursa as if noticing for the first time. Who is he? Just a friend who was held by the slavers with me, sir, Reyes explained. I don't think he's too happy with what you did to Dragonman Finerte. Just Finerte, the Alderman commented. He automatically lost his rank the moment he was sentenced. But why? Was he a friend of the accused? No, Reyes replied, nothing like that. I rather think he was hoping to have the pleasure of killing Finerte himself. No, Ursa commented. He almost sounded stricken, as if Reyes had given away some secret that had now landed the Minotaur in a heap of trouble with this revelation. Really, the Alderman said. Then to Ursa he commented, well, that traitor will be hung up in the courtyard soon. Help yourself. Your lordship is too kind, Ursa commented. He averted his eyes as he spoke, but there was a relief in the Minotaur's voice. Come, Tamrag, the Alderman invited. Our prisoner awaits. Reyes bowed his head just a little, and then looked at the approaching Inquisitor, another enemy he would have to deal with if he was going to rescue his brother. There was a chance, though. Maybe he would be able to make use of the Inquisitor first. My lord, I have a broken wing. Might I ask if the Inquisitor can fix it? I am certain he can, the Alderman replied in a friendly tone. He's very powerful. I'm sure we can arrange something later. Later? Reyes echoed. He hadn't intended it as a question. He hadn't really intended to speak at all. It had just slipped out. Yes, the Alderman commented. Once we've talked to the prisoner and learned all we can from him.